January 17, 1941. Over the skies of northern France. A Wellington bomber cut through the thin morning air. The German fighters were close now, their Messerschmitt Bf 109s slicing toward the vulnerable rear. Inside the bomber, the tail gunner's hands tightened around the Vickers K machine gun. Every nerve screamed as the first fighter swooped into his line of fire. The Messerschmitt rolled, firing bursts meant to cripple, but the Wellington's rear turret responded with calculated precision. Each squeeze of the trigger sent tracers streaking into the sky, painting lines of death across enemy wings. The pilot adjusted course, trying to keep the bomber stable, while radio chatter warned of more fighters converging from starboard. From above, the formation of RAF bombers appeared almost choreographed, each turret covering the next, overlapping fields of fire. German attacks faltered, pilots forced into evasive maneuvers they had barely rehearsed. One fighter spiraled down in flames, caught in a precise rear-gunner volley. Another barely escaped, wings smoking, retreating into the distance. In that deadly moment, the effectiveness of British defensive gunnery became undeniable. For the Luftwaffe, the rear of a Wellington had become a trap, a calculated battlefield where survival hung by a thread. By 1940, Britain had already recognized the vulnerability of its bomber fleets. The early months of the war had revealed a harsh reality. Unescorted bombers were easy prey for Luftwaffe fighters. The Royal Air Force, RAF, responded by emphasizing defensive tactics, particularly the use of tail gunners to protect vulnerable aircraft. Rear gunners were not merely appendages to the plane, they were lifelines, trained to deliver deadly accuracy under extreme pressure. British bomber design evolved rapidly. The Vickers Wellington, equipped with a powered tail turret, became a standard-bearer for defensive aerial firepower. Its rotating turret allowed a gunner to track fast-moving fighters approaching from behind. Inside the turret, controls were designed for rapid response. Every movement was calculated to counter the Luftwaffe's increasingly aggressive attacks. Training was meticulous. RAF gunners underwent live-fire exercises simulating enemy attack angles. They learned to anticipate German maneuvers, to predict the split-second paths of approaching Messerschmitts. Observation decks inside the turret offered panoramic sightlines. Gunners relied on both instinct and calculation, mastering the rhythm of flight and fire. This expertise would define countless encounters over occupied Europe. Meanwhile, German pilots initially underestimated these defenses. Many assumed that approaching from above or below was sufficient to bypass British fire. Early encounters quickly proved otherwise. RAF gunners combined predictive aiming with coordinated formation tactics, covering not just their own bomber, but overlapping the arcs of neighboring aircraft. The rear of each Wellington became a defensive network, a trap for those who sought to strike. The Luftwaffe's initial successes in the Battle of France were deceptive. German fighter pilots enjoyed superior speed and maneuverability, but the RAF's lead defenses countered raw agility with calculated lethality. Tail gunners, armed with .303 Vickers guns, could unleash bursts calibrated to strike vital components of attacking fighters. Reports from early 1941 described entire German squadrons breaking off attacks after suffering heavy losses from well-aimed defensive fire. Britain's industrial and technological capacity supported this evolution. The rapid production of turret mechanisms, ammunition, and aircraft meant gunners could rely on consistent hardware. Unlike their adversaries, British rear gunners were not forced to improvise mid-flight. Every Wellington deployed in combat embodied lessons from prior engagements, a combination of tactical refinement and mechanical reliability. This period also highlighted the human dimension. Gunners endured extreme conditions, confined turrets, icy winds, and constant vigilance. Fatigue was a constant threat, yet professionalism and morale remained high. RAF crews developed informal communication methods, using signals, glances, and experience-based intuition to coordinate during chaotic skirmishes. In many cases, survival depended on these small, disciplined acts. The British doctrine of overlapping formations further magnified the rear gunner's effectiveness. Bombers flew in staggered boxes or V-shaped patterns, ensuring each tail gunner covered not only his own aircraft but also his wingmen. German pilots attempting to exploit blind spots found themselves confronted by a web of fire. Approaches that seemed open in theory were closed in practice. This systematic coordination turned defensive fire from an individual skill into a collective weapon. By mid-1941, these defensive tactics were integral to RAF strategy. Rear gunners became a critical component of aerial doctrine, shaping the behavior of enemy forces. German pilots adjusted their approaches, but the effectiveness of British defensive systems forced repeated recalculations. Every attack carried risk, every angle could prove fatal. This context, of disciplined training, advanced technology, and calculated formations, set the stage for the deadly encounters that would define Britain's aerial dominance. The skill, preparation, and coordination of British air crews created a stark contrast with the assumptions of German attackers. Where Luftwaffe pilots expected easy victories, they often encountered disciplined defensive fire, turning their speed and maneuverability into liabilities. The stage was set. The rear of the RAF bomber had become both shield and weapon, a crucible where German fighters would learn the limits of their tactics. The design of British bomber formations emphasized mutual protection. Staggered box patterns were common, each aircraft covering the blind spots of the one beside it. The rear turret of a Wellington, once thought merely defensive, became a focal point for shaping enemy behavior. German fighters attempting to exploit gaps found themselves under simultaneous fire from multiple bombers. The overlapping arcs of machine gun fire created a zone where mistakes were often fatal. British gunners trained specifically to maximize these arcs. Exercises simulated German attack runs from above, below, and directly behind. Gunners memorized the flight paths of common Luftwaffe maneuvers, from steep diving attacks to high-speed horizontal passes. Reaction times were drilled to perfection. Within the confines of the tail turret, every second counted. A single misjudgment could expose the aircraft to destruction, yet every precise burst increased the bomber's survival odds. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, continued to rely on experience and instinct rather than comprehensive intelligence on British defensive systems. Many pilots believed that a fast pass or a coordinated two-plane attack would suffice to disable a Wellington. Early confrontations quickly proved these assumptions flawed. Tail gunners combined the mechanical precision of their turrets with predictive aiming, tracking multiple targets simultaneously. The rear of the aircraft became a lethal convergence point. Technological factors enhanced British effectiveness. The Vickers K gun, mounted in a powered turret, could rotate 360 degrees. Its high rate of fire allowed gunners to saturate an attack zone with bullets. Tracer rounds provided immediate visual feedback, enabling adjustments mid-encounter. Ammunition was carefully distributed to sustain continuous bursts, ensuring that every defensive engagement could be maintained long enough to discourage repeated attacks. The combination of machinery and human skill formed an integrated system that German pilots struggled to comprehend fully. RAF crew coordination extended beyond individual aircraft. Signals, prearranged maneuvers, and shared tactical understanding created a networked defense. Bombers flew in tight formations, each tail gunner aware of adjacent arcs of fire. German fighters attempting to thread between aircraft found themselves trapped in a web of bullets. Tactics that might have succeeded against isolated aircraft failed when confronted with the disciplined interplay of multiple Wellingtons. Training emphasized adaptability. Rear gunners were taught to predict not only the immediate trajectory of an attacker but also likely evasive maneuvers. Continuous exercises fostered a combination of muscle memory and situational awareness. Crews rotated positions during practice to ensure every gunner understood formation dynamics, allowing replacements to maintain lethal coverage without hesitation. The psychological impact on German pilots was significant. Encounters with overlapping fields of fire caused rapid assessment errors, forcing high-speed maneuvers that often led to structural stress or collision risk. Rear gunners became instruments of both destruction and deterrence. Accounts from captured pilots detail the terror inspired by facing a Wellington formation. The rear turret, once dismissed as a minor threat, had become a formidable adversary in its own right. British adaptation also influenced equipment design. Early lessons showed that speed alone did not guarantee success. Adjustments were made to turret armor, ammunition types, and sighting mechanisms. Crews could rely on consistent weapon performance, reducing human error and enhancing confidence. This reliability reinforced the collective defensive doctrine, allowing formations to absorb attacks while maintaining bombing accuracy. By mid-1941, the RAF had created a multi-layered system that exploited both human and mechanical advantages. German pilots faced not just a single defensive gunner but a coordinated network capable of covering every approach. The rear of a Wellington became a zone where enemy tactics collided with meticulous preparation, transforming potential weakness into an offensive advantage. Every encounter further refined these lessons. AF reports recorded German fighters breaking off attacks after repeated tailgunner fire. Each loss or near miss contributed to evolving tactics, reinforcing British supremacy in defensive aerial combat. The combination of skill, technology, and strategic planning had reshaped the air war over Europe. The men in the rear turrets carried a unique burden. Constrained in tight, rotating compartments, they faced long hours of monotony punctuated by moments of extreme terror. Every approaching dot on the horizon could signal life or death. Training sharpened their reflexes, but instinct often guided the first split second of fire. Tail gunners described a dual awareness, watching the sky while feeling the vibration of the aircraft beneath them. The human element was decisive. Even the most advanced turret was ineffective without precise timing and steady nerves. Gunners relied on practiced communication with pilots and fellow crew members. A glance or a brief word over the intercom could mean adjusting formation, anticipating maneuvers, or coordinating with adjacent aircraft. Survival depended on teamwork and trust. Many crews formed bonds forged in shared danger, creating an invisible network that amplified the effectiveness of each gunner. German pilots often underestimated this cohesion, mistaking isolated skill for individual ability rather than a collective defensive strategy. British defensive doctrine emphasized overlapping arcs of fire. Formation design ensured that every approach angle was covered by more than one turret. Box formations, V-shaped wings, and staggered lines transformed individual bombers into nodes within a lethal network. German fighters attempting to exploit gaps discovered that there were none. The combination of lateral and vertical spacing allowed gunners to engage enemies from multiple positions, creating zones where miscalculation could prove fatal. Tactical drills trained gunners to anticipate attacks, not merely react. Observation of German fighters' previous engagement patterns allowed RAF crews to predict dive paths, turning points, and evasive maneuvers. These calculations happened in seconds, often under intense stress. Pilots adjusted speed and trajectory to support gunners, maintaining stability for accurate fire. Over time, these tactics forced the Luftwaffe to approach cautiously, changing the dynamics of each engagement in Britain's favor. The machinery behind the rear gunner was critical. The Vickers K machine gun, mounted in a powered turret, allowed rapid rotation and continuous fire. Ammunition belts were carefully calibrated to provide sustained bursts, and tracer rounds gave instant feedback on trajectory and aim. Early turrets were manually operated, but powered mechanisms improved both speed and accuracy, letting gunners track multiple targets simultaneously. These technological enhancements reduced reliance on luck and amplified skill. British advancements extended beyond guns. Turret sighting systems allowed precise calculations of lead angles, while turret rotation speed kept pace with fast-approaching fighters. The combination of hardware and training created a system where German speed and maneuverability offered diminishing returns. Attacks that might succeed against slower or less coordinated aircraft failed against disciplined, technologically supported gunners. German losses confirmed the effectiveness of these innovations. British bomber formations were more than defensive postures, they were calculated instruments of survival. Each Wellington occupied a position that maximized overlapping fields of fire. Pilots maintained precise spacing, ensuring that rear gunners could cover not only their own aircraft but also adjacent bombers. German fighters attempting to thread between aircraft quickly discovered that each corridor was monitored. Mistimed approaches led to concentrated bursts of machine gun fire, and repeated attacks often ended in retreat or destruction. Formation discipline required constant attention. Pilots adjusted altitude, speed, and heading in response to both enemy threats and signals from wingmen. Rear gunners coordinated their arcs to fill gaps that appeared as the formation moved. This dynamic, responsive system transformed a bomber group into a networked defensive weapon. German pilots were forced into predictable patterns, where their actions could be countered systematically. The integration of human skill and collective coordination made the rear of a Wellington effectively inescapable. German pilots faced both tactical and psychological challenges. Initial assumptions about bomber vulnerability were shattered by well-aimed defensive fire. Pilots reported a sense of panic when approaching rear arcs, realizing that multiple gunners could target them simultaneously. Speed and agility offered some advantage, but sustained fire from overlapping turrets eroded confidence and increased error rates. Many Luftwaffe reports note abrupt break-offs from attack runs, often after a single encounter revealed the lethal concentration of British gunners. The Luftwaffe attempted various strategies to counter rear gunners. Diving attacks, high-speed passes, and coordinated two-plane assaults were employed. Yet British training and formation discipline reduced the effectiveness of these maneuvers. German pilots faced a learning curve they could not quickly overcome. Every engagement reinforced the risks inherent in approaching British bombers from behind. Over time, fear and respect for rear gunners shaped Luftwaffe tactics across multiple theaters of war. The choice and design of ammunition enhanced the rear gunners' lethality. Tracer rounds illuminated targets, allowing gunners to adjust aim during fast-moving encounters. Mixed belts of high-explosive and armor-piercing rounds ensured damage to both aircraft structures and engines. The Vickers K gun's high rate of fire allowed gunners to saturate the enemy approach corridor, discouraging repeated passes. British engineers optimized belt length, feed reliability, and firing cadence to maintain maximum effectiveness during sustained engagements. Effective ammunition extended the tactical reach of the rear gunner. Fighters attempting to escape quickly were often caught in overlapping bursts, reducing survivable angles. Reports from Luftwaffe pilots detail both mechanical and psychological effects of encountering continuous tracer streams. German aircraft frequently suffered wing or fuselage damage before even completing a pass. The combination of human skill, formation discipline, and optimized ammunition made escape from the rear gunner increasingly unlikely. March 3, 1941. Over the Ruhr Valley, a formation of Wellingtons prepared for a strategic bombing run. The German fighters arrived in waves, Messerschmitt Bf 109s diving from above, hoping to exploit perceived weaknesses in the British defensive network. Inside each bomber, rear gunners braced for the approaching threat. Every second counted. The first wave of Bf 109s attempted standard attack runs. From his turret, Sergeant Thomas Collins tracked the lead fighter as it rolled into the rear arc. His fingers tightened around the trigger, sending bursts of tracer rounds slicing through the Luftwaffe formation. The fighter tried to evade, banking sharply, but the calculated angles of fire left little room for escape. Within moments, the aircraft spiraled, smoke trailing behind it as it vanished into the clouds below. Adjacent Wellingtons followed suit. Each rear gunner engaged in near-perfect coordination, their overlapping arcs of fire transforming the open sky into a deadly grid. German pilots were forced into evasive maneuvers they had neither trained for nor expected. One Messerschmitt, attempting a high-speed dive, collided with the wing of another attacking aircraft, both spiraling downward in flames. The bomber formation held. Pilots adjusted speed and heading to maintain cohesion, while gunners recalibrated their sights for the next approach. German fighters regrouped, attempting alternate angles, but each move fell into prearranged defensive zones. The effectiveness of Britain's tactical design became evident. The Luftwaffe's superior speed and maneuverability were neutralized by precision, training, and coordination. Inside the tail turret, Collins felt the rhythm of engagement: observe, track, fire, adjust. The human element synchronized with technology. The Vickers K gun responded without hesitation. Every burst aimed to disable, not merely scare. Tracers illuminated the fighter's path, creating a visual barrier that forced pilots to retreat or face destruction. From the German perspective, attacks that might have succeeded against isolated bombers were failing in predictable ways. Each fighter's attempt to evade British fire led to greater exposure, often drawing it into another gunner's crosshairs. Accounts later captured in RAF intelligence reports described the frustration and disbelief among Luftwaffe pilots. Rear gunners, once considered secondary, had become central to survival and mission success. The engagement continued for nearly 15 minutes, a tense ballet of calculated risk. German pilots adapted mid-flight, diving lower or circling back, but the overlapping fields of fire, tracer-guided bursts, and disciplined formation prevented any breakthrough. One after another, the Bf-109s either withdrew or suffered damage, their attacks repelled systematically. As the formation neared its target, the Luftwaffe's losses were evident. Smoke trails and spiraling aircraft marked a sky that had seemed threatening moments before. Rear gunners had turned the tide, transforming a potentially perilous mission into a testament of defensive mastery. For Britain, the event confirmed that doctrine, training, and technology could overcome even a numerically and technically formidable enemy. The Ruhr Valley encounter illustrated a crucial point. The rear of a Wellington was not merely defensive, it was decisive. German fighters, relying on speed, experience, and aggression, confronted an orchestrated system they could not penetrate. This turning point would shape subsequent IAF operations, forcing the Luftwaffe to reconsider attack patterns and revealing the lethal interplay of human skill and mechanical precision in aerial warfare. Every maneuver, every burst of fire, contributed to a narrative of British dominance in the skies. The success of rear gunners was not accidental, it was the product of strategy, training, and calculated design. The Luftwaffe's retreat underscored the strategic advantage Britain had cultivated, one that would continue to define aerial encounters for months to come. March 3, 1941. The Luftwaffe regrouped for a second attempt over the Ruhr. The German pilots had learned from their initial failures but underestimated the discipline of the RAF formations. Wellingtons held their staggered box formation, tail gunners ready, machine guns poised for every approach. The sky became a theater of precision, where every pilot action met with calculated resistance. Lieutenant James Hargreaves, manning a rear turret, spotted multiple Bf-109s attempting to dive from the sunward flank. He tracked the first, timing burst to coincide with the aircraft's roll. Tracer rounds seared arcs across the sky, forcing the fighter into a desperate climb. Another pilot approached from the opposite side, but overlapping fields of fire left no blind spots. Within seconds, 2 German aircraft were forced to break off, smoke trailing from minor wing damage inflicted by accurate defensive fire. British pilots maintained formation integrity, adjusting speed and angle subtly to keep arcs of fire continuous. Rear gunners moved as if part of a single organism, each aware of the adjacent turret's coverage. German pilots attempted evasive spirals and sudden dives, but each maneuver exposed them to yet another barrage of bullets. The Luftwaffe's superior maneuverability was neutralized by anticipation, coordination, and the lethal geometry of overlapping defensive arcs. Mechanical reliability amplified the human effort. The Vickers K guns responded instantly, turrets rotating smoothly to track high-speed targets. Ammunition belts fed without interruption, ensuring sustained defensive coverage. Tracers allowed gunners to adjust on the fly, creating a visual deterrent that forced German pilots to rethink approach angles mid-run. The synergy of technology and human skill became evident with every passing second. The psychological toll on Luftwaffe pilots intensified. Encounters that had seemed feasible now resulted in repeated near misses and visible losses. Reports later captured in RAF debriefs describe German pilots abandoning coordinated attack runs out of fear of reargunner fire. Confidence eroded rapidly as the effectiveness of British defensive doctrine became undeniable. One Messerschmitt, attempting a low-level slalom between Wellingtons, misjudged the spacing and collided with another fighter. Both aircraft tumbled out of control, leaving behind plumes of smoke. Observing the chaos, Lieutenant Hargreaves remained focused, firing controlled bursts at a third approaching aircraft. The German fighter banked violently to avoid impact, only to encounter overlapping arcs from another bomber's turret. Within seconds, it too was forced to disengage. The decisive nature of the engagement demonstrated a broader tactical truth: Britain's rear gunners were force multipliers. Each Wellington's defense extended beyond its physical aircraft, creating zones of lethal fire that transformed the sky itself into a barrier. German tactics, reliant on speed and individual skill, collided with structured, disciplined, and technologically enhanced defense. Success became increasingly unlikely, and retreat emerged as the only option for surviving Luftwaffe pilots. By the conclusion of the battle, the RAF formation remained largely intact. Losses were minimal among British bombers, while the Luftwaffe suffered multiple aircraft downed or damaged beyond immediate repair. The encounter cemented the rear gunner's role as central to both survival and operational success. It also highlighted the cumulative effect of training, technology, and formation discipline against an enemy relying on reactive maneuvers and aggression. The Ruhr Valley engagement marked a turning point in RAF doctrine. German fighters now had to adjust attack patterns, avoid predictable arcs, and accept the inherent danger of engaging British bombers from behind. Meanwhile, British crews gained confidence, knowing that skill, preparation, and the mechanical reliability of their defensive systems could decisively shape aerial engagements. The events over the Ruhr Valley transitioned into a broader understanding of aerial combat. Rear gunners were no longer secondary participants, they dictated the terms of engagement. German pilots, once aggressive and overconfident, learned that the rear of a Wellington was a domain where every approach carried risk, every maneuver could provoke a lethal response. Britain's dominance in the skies was not accidental, it was engineered through training, technology, and tactical foresight. The Ruhr engagement left a clear mark on both sides. British bomber formations returned largely intact, their crews unscathed but mentally sharpened by the intensity of the encounter. Reports emphasized the effectiveness of rear gunners, noting that German fighter losses and forced retreats were directly attributable to overlapping arcs of fire and disciplined defensive tactics. Confidence within the RAF soared, reinforced by tangible evidence that preparation and training could decisively influence outcomes. Rear gunners were recognized as pivotal components of operational success. Pilots and crew members praised their skill in post-mission debriefings. Sergeant Thomas Collins, who had downed a Bf 109 during the encounter, described the satisfaction of witnessing the enemy falter under precision fire. Such accounts were not isolated. Across multiple squadrons, gunners were acknowledged for transforming defensive positioning into a proactive force that dictated the flow of battle. The Luftwaffe faced a starkly different reality. German pilots reported surprise and frustration at the effectiveness of British defensive measures. Attack patterns that had previously yielded success no longer guaranteed results. The combination of turret technology, ammunition optimization, and formation discipline forced German commanders to reconsider conventional doctrines. Briefings noted increased caution in attack runs, as pilots learned that approaching from the rear could now be more lethal than a frontal assault. Intelligence gathered from downed German aircraft reinforced IF understanding of enemy limitations. Examination of Bf 109 wreckage revealed structural damage consistent with accurate turret fire. Combined with pilot testimonies, these findings confirmed that the rear of a Wellington had become a hazardous zone. The Luftwaffe adjusted by implementing staggered attack sequences and higher altitude approaches, though these methods were slower and more predictable, giving British gunners further advantage. Operational planning within the RAF began to incorporate these lessons systematically. Bomber Command emphasized maintaining tight formations, ensuring that overlapping fields of fire were always in place. Crews received additional training on coordinating turret coverage and anticipating enemy maneuvers. These adjustments strengthened the defensive capability of the force as a whole. The integration of human skill and mechanical reliability proved decisive in maintaining operational continuity while minimizing losses. The encounter also had psychological effects on both sides. For British crews, the success of rear gunners reinforced a sense of control and agency in the air. Training and preparation translated directly into survival, validating doctrine and boosting morale. For German pilots, repeated failures against coordinated defensive fire eroded confidence, fostering caution that often slowed or aborted attacks. The imbalance created a subtle yet significant advantage for Britain, extending beyond immediate tactical outcomes into broader strategic influence. The Ruhr engagement illustrated a broader principle: effective defense could shape the offensive behavior of a superior or equally skilled enemy. Rear gunners, previously considered auxiliary, had become central to both survival and operational doctrine. Their actions dictated how German pilots approached targets, constrained Luftwaffe aggression, and directly influenced the course of engagements over occupied Europe. By reinforcing defensive principles through repeated, verifiable outcomes, the RAF transformed lessons learned into enduring operational practice. Training, technology, and coordination proved more than sufficient to counter the numerical and tactical advantages of the enemy. Rear gunners, as both human actors and operators of lethal machinery, emerged as pivotal figures in maintaining British air supremacy during critical early war campaigns. The results of this engagement directly informed the broader strategic calculus for both sides. German pilots approached subsequent missions with heightened caution, while British crews maintained confidence in their training, equipment, and formation discipline. This interplay set the stage for long-term adaptation and evolution in aerial warfare doctrine. The weeks following the Ruhr engagement revealed the lasting effects on Luftwaffe strategy. German commanders implemented new attack protocols, favoring higher-altitude passes and multidirectional approaches. Yet these adjustments often played into the RAF's hands. The tighter formations and overlapping turret coverage minimized blind spots, forcing German pilots into predictable trajectories. The defensive innovations that Britain had honed were now dictating the terms of combat. Losses among German aircraft mounted. While initial reports had underestimated the effectiveness of British gunners, subsequent missions confirmed that rear attacks carried severe risk. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s frequently suffered wing or fuselage damage from concentrated defensive fire. Even when fighters survived, psychological strain was evident. Pilots approaching rear arcs developed caution bordering on hesitation, reducing the speed and aggressiveness that had previously given them tactical advantage. British aircrews gained experience and confidence with every sortie. The proven lethality of rear gunners allowed bomber pilots to focus on navigation and bombing precision without fear of catastrophic surprise attacks from behind. The integration of training, technology, and formation discipline created a cycle of reinforcement. Every engagement strengthened doctrine, equipment reliability, and crew coordination. RAF intelligence gathered from captured aircraft, intercepted communications, and aerial reconnaissance provided further insight. Patterns of failed Luftwaffe attacks highlighted specific weaknesses in German offensive planning. Rear gunners were able to exploit these weaknesses systematically, turning prior engagements into predictive advantages. The data informed tactical briefings, allowing crews to anticipate likely attack vectors and position turrets accordingly. Strategic implications extended beyond individual missions. German pilots, wary of rear gunners, increasingly avoided concentrated attacks on bomber streams. RAF formations faced fewer high-risk frontal assaults and benefited from the psychological deterrent imposed by lethal defensive fire. This shifted the balance of air power, as Britain could execute bombing operations with reduced attrition while compelling the Luftwaffe to expend resources on less effective strategies. The aftermath also revealed the importance of technological reliability. Turret mechanisms, ammunition supply, and sighting systems were consistently tested under combat conditions. The ability of gunners to deliver sustained, accurate fire without mechanical failure reinforced confidence across entire squadrons. German pilots encountered a dual threat: skilled operators and dependable machinery, a combination that proved overwhelming in repeated engagements. Numbers tell the story as well. RAF loss rates in coordinated bomber streams were significantly lower than early war projections. Conversely, Luftwaffe attrition increased disproportionately during attempts to penetrate overlapping defensive arcs. Reports from captured German pilots describe frustration at encountering what they called an invisible net of bullets, an acknowledgement of the effectiveness of British preparation and discipline. The cumulative effect of these engagements transformed operational doctrine. Rear gunners became central to planning, training, and mission execution. Pilots and commanders recognized that the skill and coordination of gunners could alter the outcome of entire sorties. The Ruhr Valley encounter had established a template that would guide British bomber operations for months, influencing tactics across multiple theaters of war. Ultimately, the RAF's emphasis on preparation, formation integrity, and technological support created an enduring advantage. German fighters were forced to adapt, often at the cost of speed, initiative, and effectiveness. Britain's defensive doctrine had proven not only viable but dominant, turning the rear of a Wellington into a zone of calculated lethality and strategic significance. These outcomes set the stage for a broader reflection on what this defensive evolution meant for aerial warfare, human courage, and the future of air combat. The lessons learned from rear gunner effectiveness would resonate far beyond the Ruhr Valley. The rear turret of a Wellington bomber, once a modest defensive tool, had become a decisive force in the air war over Europe. Britain's combination of training, technology, and tactical discipline transformed what was once a vulnerability into a weapon capable of shaping enemy behavior. Every attack repelled, every fighter forced to retreat, was proof that preparation and skill could redefine the battlefield. Rear gunners were both human and mechanical instruments of survival. Their ability to anticipate, react, and coordinate turned the chaos of aerial combat into a calculated contest of precision and nerve. Tracer streaks across the sky were not just bullets in flight, they were statements of British resolve. In the crucible of combat, the men behind the guns demonstrated that courage and training, when paired with reliable machinery, could determine outcomes even against a numerically and technically formidable foe. The consequences extended beyond immediate tactical success. German pilots were forced to rethink attack patterns, to respect defensive arcs, and to acknowledge the limits of speed and maneuverability against disciplined formations. Britain's innovations in bomber defense influenced aerial doctrine across theaters of war, demonstrating that control of the air required not only offense but the ability to turn defense into an active, shaping force. Ultimately, these engagements were a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. They illustrate how preparation, coordination, and adaptation could tip the balance in moments of extreme danger. The story of rear gunners is also the story of Britain's strategic mindset: meticulous, disciplined, and forward-thinking. In the wider scope of history, the deadly rear arcs of British bombers serve as a reminder that innovation in warfare often lies in transforming weaknesses into strengths. The courage of the gunners, the foresight of commanders, and the reliability of their machines combined to create a legacy of aerial mastery. In the skies over Europe, Britain had not only defended its aircraft, it had demonstrated that calculated defense could become an unstoppable instrument of war.